The last order Marcus gave me was to leave him behind. I didn't know it was the last order. That's the part that breaks something in me every time I circle back to it, and I circle back constantly, like a dog chained to a post. I thought it was tactical. I thought it was the kind of hard call he always made better than me, the kind of decision that proved why he led, and I followed. He said, "Take the girl and go north through the garage. I'll hold the stairwell." And I did it. I took the girl and I went north through the garage. Because Marcus said to. Because Marcus always knew. My name is Joel Allard. I was a staff sergeant in the National Guard, deployed domestically when the outbreak hit Detroit. I say was because there's no Guard anymore. There's no Detroit anymore. Not really. There are buildings and there are things moving between them. And there are people like me trying to figure out which category they fall into. Marcus Bowen was my best friend. Not in the way people throw that word around, and not a guy I watched football with or called when I needed to vent about my ex-wife. Marcus was the person I oriented my decisions around. In the field, in the barracks, even in civilian life. He had this gravity to him. 6'2", wide shoulders, voice like a diesel engine at idle. When he talked, you didn't just listen, you reorganized your priorities. He'd been my squad leader for 2 years before the outbreak, and when the domestic deployment came down and everything started falling apart faster than command could issue memos about it, Marcus was the one who kept our unit from dissolving like every other unit around us. We'd been running a checkpoint on the I-94 corridor for 9 days when the evacuation orders changed for the third time. First, we were funneling civilians toward the Ford Field shelter complex. Then Ford Field was overrun and we were redirecting to the Ambassador Bridge crossing into Windsor. Then Windsor closed the border with armored vehicles and snipers on the Canadian side, and we were told to hold position and await further instructions. Further instructions never came. The radio net went to static on day 6. On day 7, a convoy of Humvees from another unit rolled through our checkpoint without stopping, heading west. They didn't even slow down. One of the gunners up top looked at us as they passed and just shook his head. Marcus watched them go. Then he turned to the 8 of us, still at the checkpoint, and said, "We're still here, so we still have a job." That was Marcus. The world subtracted meaning from everything around him, and he just added it back. There were 9 of us then. Me, Marcus, Corporal Dana Watts, Private First Class Alejandro Speedo Reyes, Private Tomlin, Private Obasi, a combat medic named Herrera, and 2 civilian volunteers who'd been helping us manage the refugee flow, a retired firefighter named Gareth, and a college kid named Priya, who spoke 4 languages and had been translating for the non-English speaking families coming through. When the flow stopped and the families stopped coming, Gareth and Priya stayed anyway. They didn't have anywhere else to be. On the morning of day 10, Marcus gathered us at the checkpoint and laid out a new plan. We weren't holding the corridor anymore. We were going to move east toward the riverfront, where he'd heard through a CB radio Gareth had rigged to an old truck battery that a barge was being loaded for a civilian evacuation across to Belle Isle. Belle Isle wasn't secure in any permanent sense, but it was an island, and an island meant water on all sides, and water meant a natural barrier. "We move as a unit," Marcus said. "We pick up survivors if we can. We don't stop for supplies unless I call it. We stay tight, we stay quiet, we stay alive." Nobody questioned it. I certainly didn't. I'd been following Marcus's calls for so long that the idea of generating my own felt almost physically uncomfortable, like trying to write with my wrong hand. We left the checkpoint at 0600. The morning was cold for October, breath visible, and the street was dense with abandoned cars. Some of them still had people inside, not alive. Not dead either, exactly. The first one I saw was a woman in a minivan, still buckled into her seat, her head moving in a slow, repetitive arc against the window like a metronome. Her skin had gone the color of wet cement. Her eyes tracked us as we passed. Marcus held up a fist stop and we waited as she pressed her face against the glass and opened her mouth. No sound. Just that slow, mechanical jaw movement. Then Marcus signaled us forward and we kept walking. That image stayed with me for the next 48 hours. Not because it was the worst thing I saw, because of how little Marcus reacted to it. He glanced, assessed, moved on. At the time, I thought it was command discipline. Now I wonder if he was already calculating differently than the rest of us. Now I wonder what he already knew. The route Marcus chose took us through a commercial district south of Gresham Avenue. Burned out storefronts, shattered glass, a pharmacy that had been gutted so thoroughly that even the shelving units were gone, dragged out probably to build barricades somewhere. The streets were quieter than I expected. The infected we encountered were mostly solitary, standing in doorways or sitting against walls with that vacant tremor they get in the early stages, before the aggression locks in. Herrera called them drifters, said they were in a kind of neurological holding pattern. The virus had shut down higher function, but hadn't fully activated the predatory drive yet. How long before they activate? Watts asked. Herrera shrugged. 12 hours, maybe less. Depends on the person. On what about the person? I don't know. Body mass, stress hormones, God's sense of humor. Watts didn't laugh. Nobody did. But the exchange mattered because it established something I didn't fully appreciate until later. Herrera was precise. She didn't guess. She didn't comfort. She gave you what she knew and drew a hard line around what she didn't. That precision would become important. We made it about 2 miles before Marcus called our first stop, a 3-story parking garage attached to a dead shopping center. Good sight lines from the top level, concrete walls, limited entry points. He sent Reyes and Tomlin to clear the ground floor, while the rest of us held the ramp. They came back in 4 minutes. 2 drifters on level 1, both non-responsive. Obasi zip-tied them to a support column, which sounds cruel when I say it now, but at the time it was protocol. You didn't waste ammunition on drifters if you didn't have to, and you didn't leave unknowns at your back. We set up on the 2nd level. Marcus posted Watts on the roof as a lookout and pulled me aside near the elevator shaft. I need you to take inventory, he said. Ammo, water, food, medical, full count. Bring it to me and only me. Why only you? He looked at me, not impatient, but closed. Because I need to make allocation decisions and I don't need a committee. I didn't push. That was my pattern with Marcus. I'd feel the edge of a question, sense that pressing it would mean stepping outside my role, and I'd pull back. It wasn't cowardice, it was trust. Or it was cowardice dressed up as trust. I still don't know, I did the count. It wasn't good. 7 magazines between us for the M4s. Watts had her sidearm with 3 mags. Herrera had a basic trauma kit that was already half depleted from checkpoint work. Water for maybe 2 days if we rationed hard. Food for less. I brought the numbers to Marcus. He studied them, nodded once and said, "We move again at 1400. River's about 4 miles. We can make it before dark if we don't get tangled up. And if the barge isn't there, then we find another way onto the island." He paused. "But the barge will be there." I wanted to ask how he could possibly know that. The CB transmission Gareth had picked up was hours old and fragmentary. But Marcus said it with that voice, the one that turned speculation into fact just through delivery, and I nodded. We rested. I sat against a concrete pillar and watched the gray light filter through the garage's open sides. Priya was sitting across from me, writing something in a small notebook. She'd been doing that since the checkpoint recording names, I think. Names of people who'd passed through, families, children, elderly couples. A record that might never matter to anyone but her. "Do you think the island will work?" she asked without looking up. "Marcus seems to think so." She did look up then. I asked what you think. I didn't have an answer. Not because I disagreed with Marcus, but because I genuinely hadn't formed an independent assessment. The question embarrassed me in a way I couldn't articulate, so I said something vague about defensible positions and water barriers, and she went back to her notebook. That was the last quiet conversation I had before everything Marcus built started coming apart. Not from the outside, from the inside, from something he was carrying that he'd decided, for reasons I'm still excavating from the wreckage of my loyalty, to keep from all of us. At 1400, we moved out. Marcus took point with me on his right shoulder, Watts and Reyes covering the rear. The formation was tight, building to building, using the commercial blocks as cover. The infected density was increasing, not drifters anymore, but active ones, moving in loose clusters of 3 or 4 through intersections, heads swiveling, that stiff leg gait they adopt when they're hunting, but haven't locked onto a target. Marcus navigated us around them with a precision I remember admiring. He'd stop, study the pattern of movement, then route us through gaps that seemed impossibly narrow but always worked. Left on Bobian, cut through an alley behind a burned church, crossed the open ground fast while a cluster was oriented away from us, duck into the loading dock of a warehouse, wait, breathe, move again. But at the intersection of Rivard and Lafayette, his routing failed for the first time. He let us left when the cluster pattern clearly favored going right. I could see it, 3 infected moving west, away from us, leaving the right side street open for a clean 60-second crossing. But Marcus went left, directly toward a narrow street that funneled us past a ground-level parking lot where I could see movement. "Marcus," I whispered, "right side's open." "Left," he said. Not an explanation, a command. We went left. It cost us. The parking lot had 6 active infected who turned at our movement and started that horrible acceleration, the moment when the stiff gait breaks into a full lurching sprint. Reyes dropped 2, Watts dropped 1. The gunfire echoed off the buildings, and within 30 seconds we could hear more coming, drawn by the sound. We ran. Marcus led us through a breached storefront and out a back exit into an alley that connected to the next block. We lost them, but it took 10 minutes of running, and we burned through a magazine and a half doing it. When we stopped in the basement of a gutted restaurant, everyone was breathing hard and looking at each other with that specific expression, the one that calculates whether what just happened was bad luck or bad leadership. Watts said it first. "Why did we go left?" Marcus was leaning against a prep counter, his back to us. "The right street dead ends past Beaumont. I've seen the maps." "I've been on that street," Gareth said quietly. "It doesn't dead end." Marcus turned around. His face was composed, but something behind his eyes was moving a kind of interior negotiation I'd never seen in him before. "It does now. Barricade. I saw it 2 days ago on a solar recon." I didn't remember him doing a solar recon, but I didn't say that. I filed it. It sat in my chest like a seed I didn't want to water. We held in the basement for 20 minutes while Herrera checked everyone for injuries. Tomlin had twisted his ankle in the run. Obasi had a shallow cut on his forearm from the storefront glass. Herrera cleaned and wrapped both, efficient, silent. Then she moved to Marcus. "Let me see your arms." "I'm fine. Protocol. Everyone gets checked." "I said I'm fine, Herrera." The room went still. Marcus never refused medical checks. It was his own rule after every contact. Everyone gets looked at. No exceptions. He'd enforced it at the checkpoint with an iron voice. And now he was breaking his own protocol with that same voice aimed at the person trying to uphold it. Herrera held his gaze for 3 seconds, then turned away. She didn't push. Nobody did. But Priya looked at me from across the basement, and I saw the question in her face before I could fully form it in my own mind. Something was wrong, not with the route, not with the mission, with Marcus. I should have asked. Right then, in that basement, with the sound of infected movement filtering through the ceiling above us, I should have walked up to my best friend and said, "Show me your arms." I should have trusted myself enough to override him. I didn't, and every order he gave after that moment is something I now have to carry. We reached the riverfront at dusk, which was the worst possible timing. The light was failing, the shadows were thickening between the waterfront buildings, and the infected were entering what Herrera called their transition window. That period when the ones who'd been semi-dormant during daylight started cycling into full aggression. You could hear it in the soundscape, a low, building murmur of movement from every direction, like the city itself was waking up angry. The barge wasn't there. I watched Marcus scan the waterfront, the empty dock, the black water, the far silhouette of Belle Isle sitting low and dark against the last band of twilight. His face didn't change. That's what I remember. Not disappointment, not recalculation, just a kind of settled recognition, as if he'd already known and had been preparing for this moment while telling us the opposite. "We hold here," he said. "Gareth, find me a building with roof access and no more than 2 ground entries. Joel, you're on watch rotation. 4-hour shifts, 2 people per shift." "How long are we holding?" Watts asked. "Until the barge comes back or we find another way across. And if neither happens?" Marcus looked at her. Then we figure out a third option, but we don't figure it out in the dark with our backs to the water. It was a reasonable answer, and it settled everyone enough to start moving. Gareth found us a 2-story customs office 50 yards from the dock. Solid brick, steel door on the ground floor, one fire exit on the east side that we barricaded with filing cabinets. Roof access through an interior stairwell. Not perfect, but workable. I set up the watch rotation and took the first shift with Reyes on the roof. The night was clear and cold. From up there you could see the river, the island, and the city stretching back behind us, a vast, dark grid, punctuated by the occasional orange glow of something still burning. The silence was deceptive. Every few minutes, a sound would float up from the streets, a crash, a moan, once a scream that cut off so abruptly it was worse than if it had continued. Reyes was quiet for the first hour. Then he said, "Sarge made a bad call on Rivard. He had information we didn't." "Did he?" "Because Gareth's been in this city for 30 years and he says that street's clear." I didn't respond. Reyes was 23, sharp, and had a tendency to question authority that I'd always found irritating. Now, sitting on that roof, his irritating tendency felt uncomfortably like clear thinking. "I'm not saying he's losing it," Reyes continued. "I'm saying we should be checking his work. That's not disrespect. That's good soldiering." He was right. I knew he was right. And I couldn't bring myself to agree out loud because agreeing would mean admitting that the compass I'd been navigating by might be spinning. Below us, inside the building, Marcus was alone in the ground floor office. He'd told everyone to rest upstairs and taken the lower level himself. "Listening post," he'd said. "I'll monitor for barge signals on the CB." At the time, it sounded like Marcus being Marcus taking the hardest post, putting himself closest to danger. Now I wonder if he wanted to be alone. If he needed to be away from Herrera's eyes, from Priya's questions, from my reflexive obedience that was starting to develop cracks. I wonder if he was already feeling it. The fever, the tremor, the slow unwinding that the virus does to your nervous system before it rebuilds you into something else. Morning brought fog off the river and a development none of us expected. Gareth had been scanning CB channels through the night after Marcus fell asleep at the radio, and at 04:30 he picked up a fragmented transmission. A civilian group, maybe 15 people, holed up in a school building 6 blocks northwest of our position. They had children with them. They had no weapons, and they were reporting infected massing around their ground floor. Gareth brought the information to Marcus, who was awake and standing at the steel door when I came downstairs. He looked diminished somehow. Not physically smaller, but less solid. There were dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there the day before. And when he moved his left arm to gesture at the map Gareth had spread on a desk, the movement was stiff, abbreviated. "We don't have the resources for a rescue," Marcus said. Gareth stared at him. "They have children. I'm aware. We have 7 magazines, 9 people, and no extraction point. We go in there, we risk this unit for people we can't sustain." "Since when do we leave kids behind?" Watts said from the doorway. Marcus didn't look at her. He looked at me. "Joel, assessment." He was asking me to back him up. I could feel it, the familiar pull of his authority, the expectation that I'd confirm his logic and shut down the dissent. And his logic wasn't wrong. We were under-equipped, overexposed, and without a viable destination. Adding 15 civilians, including children, to our group was tactically reckless. But Priya was standing behind Watts, and her notebook was in her hand, and I thought about all those names she'd been writing down, people who had passed through our checkpoint alive because we'd been there. "We should at least recon it," I said. "If the situation's manageable, we help. If it's not, we pull back." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Not anger, something colder. Disappointment, maybe, or the recognition that the mechanism he'd built my compliance was beginning to slip its gears. "Fine," he said. "Recon team, Joel, Watts, Reyes, you have 90 minutes. If you're not back, we don't come for you." That last sentence landed hard. Marcus had never said an abandonment condition before. His whole leadership philosophy was built on the principle that no one gets left. And now he was drawing a line that explicitly allowed for it. I took Watts and Reyes and we moved northwest through the fog. The streets were quieter than the night before. The infected seemed to slow and low visibility, relying more on sound than sight when the fog is thick. We moved carefully, hugging building lines, communicating with hand signals. The school was a squat brick building, PS something, the numbers broken off the facade. We could see the problem immediately. The ground floor windows were breached, and there were at least 20 infected packed into the main entrance like a clog in a pipe. They weren't getting through. The civilians had barricaded the interior stairs, but they weren't leaving either. The smell alone told us some of them had been there for days. I glassed the upper floors with binoculars. Second floor, north side, faces in the windows. Adults and children. One woman was holding a handwritten sign against the glass. It said, "Please." Watts looked at me. "We can do this. Pull them from the fire escape on the east side. Draw the ground floor infected west with noise. Extract the civvies east. Classic bait and hook. With 3 people, we've done more with less." She was right, and the plan was clean. I made the call, my call, not Marcus's, the first real tactical decision I'd made independently since the outbreak started. We executed it in 14 minutes. Reyes ran west, firing single shots at 2-second intervals, pulling the horde from the entrance and down the street. Watts and I hit the fire escape, linked up with the civilians, and brought them down in 2 groups. 15 people, 4 children under 10, an elderly man in a wheelchair that we had to carry. When we got back to the customs office, Marcus was standing outside. He counted the civilians, looked at the wheelchair, looked at the children, and said nothing. He walked back inside. That was the moment I should have understood. Not the stiff arm, not the refused medical check, not the bad routing call. This. Marcus Bowen would never have looked at 4 rescued children with that hollow, calculating expression. Not the Marcus I knew. The Marcus I knew would have been the first one out the door to get them. Something was eating him from the inside, and it was changing how he saw people. They were no longer souls to protect. They were variables to manage before his time ran out. By noon, the customs office felt like a lifeboat taking on water. 24 people in a building meant for a staff of 6. The children were frightened but quiet. They'd learned, the way children in catastrophe learn, that silence is survival. The elderly man, whose name was Arthur, had been a mechanical engineer. He couldn't walk, but his mind was sharp, and he immediately began assessing the building's structural vulnerabilities with a precision that rivaled Herrera's medical assessments. Marcus isolated himself in the ground floor office. He'd taken the CB radio and closed the door, telling me to manage the group and keep everyone off the ground level. I organized the civilians upstairs, assigned Gareth and Priya to distribute what little food and water we had, and posted Obasi and Tomlin at the barricaded fire exit. Then Herrera pulled me into the stairwell. "I need to talk to you about Marcus." "What about him?" She kept her voice low, clinical. "Last night, after everyone went to sleep, I came downstairs to check on him. He was sitting at the radio with his jacket off. His left forearm was wrapped in a field dressing. Self-applied. Sloppy work." My stomach dropped, but my mouth said, "He might have caught it on something during the run yesterday." The storefront glass. Obasi caught his arm on storefront glass. I treated it. A laceration from glass looks nothing like a bite wound, and the dressing Marcus applied was covering the exact area where you'd wrap a bite on the inner forearm. I stood there in the stairwell and felt the architecture of my loyalty begin to fracture along fault lines I'd been ignoring for 24 hours. "You didn't see the wound directly?" I said. "No. He pulled his jacket back on when he heard me on the stairs. But I saw the dressing, I saw the swelling around it, and I saw his face when he realized I was there. That was not the face of a man with a glass cut. How long? If it happened before we left the checkpoint and given his behavior patterns, I think it did, then he's past 24 hours. Maybe 30. Herrera, the turn time is 36 to 48 hours in adults. I know." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "We might have 12 hours. We might have 6. He's still giving orders. The virus doesn't shut down executive function first. It starts with emotional regulation, empathy, impulse control. The higher reasoning stays intact almost to the end. That's what makes late-stage carriers so dangerous. They can still think, they can still plan, They just stopped caring about anyone but themselves. I leaned against the wall. The concrete was cold through my jacket. Somewhere above us, a child was whispering to another child, and the sound of it was the most unbearable thing I'd ever heard. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Confront him. Verify. If I'm right, we need to isolate him and assume command transfers to you. Assume command transfers to you." 7 words that felt like being told to step off a cliff. "And if he won't let me verify?" Herrera's face was very still. "Then that's your answer." I stood in that stairwell for a long time after she left. Not because I was forming a plan, because I was trying to remember a version of myself that could make a decision without Marcus telling me it was the right one. I'd spent so long in his orbit that the idea of overriding him felt less like leadership and more like amputation, cutting away part of my own operating system. But there were 24 people in this building. 4 of them were children, and the man downstairs behind the closed door with the CB radio might be running out of humanity one synapse at a time. I went downstairs. The ground floor office smelled wrong. Not the rot smell of active infection, I'd know that anywhere. The sweet ammonia reek that clings to the inside of your nose. But the stale, trapped air smell of a person who'd been sweating through fever in a closed room. Marcus was sitting behind the desk with the CB handset near his right hand. His jacket was on, zipped to the collar despite the warmth of the room. His eyes found me immediately, and they were sharp, clear, functional. That was the cruelty of it. Herrera was right. The mind stays online even as everything else degrades. "Sit down," he said. "I'll stand." A flicker. Not on his face in the air between us. A shift in the dynamic that we both felt. I'd never refused a casual instruction from him before. Not once. Not in 2 years of service. Not in 10 days of apocalypse. "I need to see your arms, Marcus." He didn't move. Didn't blink. The CB crackled softly with empty static. "Herrera sent you," he said. "Herrera told me what she saw. I'm here because I need to see it myself. And if I tell you it's a glass cut from yesterday's contact, then show me the glass cut and we're done." He leaned back in the chair. The movement was controlled, deliberate, but I saw the cost of it, a tightness in his jaw, a slight tremor in his left hand that he stilled by pressing it flat against the desk. "Close the door," he said. I closed it. The room contracted around us. Marcus unzipped his jacket slowly, watching my face the entire time. He rolled up his left sleeve. The field dressing was there, just as Herrera described, self-applied, wrapped too tight, the edges already discolored with seepage. He unwound it with his right hand, one layer at a time, and I stood there and watched the truth emerge from under the gauze, like something surfacing from deep water. The bite was on his inner forearm, just below the elbow. 2 crescents of broken skin, swollen, the edges darkening to purple-black. The tissue around it was hot-looking, radiating lines of discoloration that tracked up toward his bicep. It was not a glass cut. It was not ambiguous. It was a human bite wound, infected, spreading. "When?" I asked. My voice came out flat, which surprised me. I'd expected it to break. "Night before we left the checkpoint, solo patrol on the perimeter. One of the drifters wasn't as dormant as I thought." He rewrapped the wound as he spoke. Methodical, practiced. He'd been doing this for over 30 hours, managing his own decay with the same discipline he managed his squad. "It was sloppy. My fault. I should have cleared it more carefully." "You should have told us." "And then what? Watch the unit dissolve? Watch everyone make their own panicked decisions about where to go and who to follow? You've seen what happens when command structure breaks down. I've been holding this group together. You've been lying to this group. I've been leading this group. There's a difference." I wanted to hit him. The impulse was so sudden and so total that it scared me. Not because Marcus didn't deserve anger, but because I'd never once felt the urge to be physically violent with someone I loved. And I did love him in the way you love someone who's been the scaffolding around your identity for years. Hitting him would be like hitting a load-bearing wall. "How long do you have?" "I don't know. Herrera would have a better estimate. She says 6 to 12 hours. He absorbed that with a nod, not a flinch. A nod like I'd given him a weather report. Then I have 6 to 12 hours to finish what I started. What you started? He leaned forward. His eyes were bright, too bright, the virus pushing blood pressure, accelerating everything. The barge isn't coming back, Joel. I knew that before we left the checkpoint. The transmission Gareth picked up was 12 hours old, and the barge frequency went dead 4 hours before we moved out. The room tilted. You knew there was no barge. I knew the barge was gone. I didn't know there was no way across. I still don't, but I needed everyone moving east. I needed you away from the checkpoint corridor because the infected migration pattern is landward, east to west, and staying on I-94 was a death sentence within 48 hours. You could have told us that. You could have given us the real reason. The real reason is complicated and uncertain. We're going to catch a barge is simple and hopeful. People follow simple and hopeful. You know that. I did know that. And that was the worst part. His logic was sound. His deception had worked. We were alive, all of us, because he'd lied with absolute conviction, and I'd transmitted that conviction to everyone else through my unquestioning obedience. There's a marina, he said, 2 miles south of here. Private docks. Some of those boats might still be functional. That's our actual extraction plan. That's been the plan since we left. Your plan, not ours. My plan that kept everyone breathing for the last 30 hours. He paused. I need you to execute one more sequence of orders, Joel. After that, you're in command, and you do whatever you think is right. I stood in that office looking at my best friend's wrapped arm, and I felt something I'd never felt before in his presence. Completely, terrifyingly alone. I didn't tell the group. That's a confession that costs me something every time I make it. So I'll say it plainly. Marcus asked me not to reveal his condition until his orders were complete, and I agreed. Not because I thought it was right, because even after seeing the bite, even after hearing the deception, some part of me was still wired to follow him. The habit of trust is a structure that doesn't collapse all at once. It goes beam by beam, and between each failure, you still walk the floor as if it will hold. Marcus laid out his final operational plan in that office with the door closed and the CB static filling the silence between his sentences. It had 3 phases. Phase 1, split the group. He wanted me to take Watts, Reyes, Priya, and the 15 civilians south toward the marina. Phase 2, he would take Gareth, Tomlin, Obasi, and Herrera north to a National Guard armory he knew about on Shane Street to secure additional weapons and supplies, then rendezvous with us at the marina by nightfall. Phase 3, we load the boats and cross to Belle Isle. Why split? I asked. 24 people moving through the city as a herd. 2 groups of 12 are manageable, and I need the armory supplies to make the island viable. Take Herrera with you? She's the only one who can manage the civilians' medical needs if something happens on your route. I heard the logic. I tested it against what I knew. It held together on the surface. A group this size was a liability in hostile urban terrain. The armory supplies were necessary. Herrera with the civilians made medical sense. But underneath, something else was operating. Marcus was separating himself from me. He was putting distance between his deteriorating body and the people I was responsible for. And he was taking 3 soldiers with him who didn't know he was bitten, who would follow his orders into a building that they might not come out of. Marcus, if you turn while you're with them, I won't. 6 hours minimum, you said. The armory's 90 minutes each way. I'll be back before anything changes. And if you're wrong, then Gareth will handle it. Gareth's killed infected before, and he doesn't have the problem you have. What problem? He doesn't love me. I stood there and let that sentence do its work. It was manipulative. It was true. And it was the last fully human thing Marcus Bowen ever said to me. I agreed to the plan. I agreed because the alternative was confronting him in front of everyone, stripping his authority, assuming command of a group that trusted him more than me, and making every subsequent decision with no plan, no weapons resupply, and no destination. I agreed because he made it easy to agree and hard to resist, which is what he'd always done, and which I now understood was as much a form of control as it was a form of care. We briefed the group at 1300. Marcus delivered the plan with his jacket zipped and his hands steady, and his voice carrying that diesel engine certainty that made people believe. Nobody questioned the split. Watts looked at me once, a measuring look, checking whether I endorsed this, and I nodded. She accepted it. I pulled Herrera aside before we separated. Watch for my signal on the CB Channel 9. If I call you back, you come back, no matter what Marcus says. She understood what I wasn't saying. Her eyes confirmed it. She squeezed my arm once and went to join Marcus's team. We moved out at 13:30. My group went south. Marcus went north. The last time I saw him, he was walking point on Sheen Street with his rifle up and his silhouette sharp against the gray sky. He didn't look back. I keep replaying that. Him not looking back. Was it discipline? Was it shame? Was the virus already pruning the circuits that would have made him turn around for one last look at his best friend? I don't know. I'll never know. And that uncertainty is its own kind of wound. The route south was 4 blocks to the river, then west along the waterfront to the marina. 12 people, 4 of them children, 1 in a wheelchair. Watts took point, Reyes took rear, and I moved through the column, keeping everyone tight and quiet. Priya walked beside Arthur's wheelchair, which Gareth's civilian, a woman named Sue Yan from the school group, was pushing with quiet determination over cracked pavement and debris. The first 2 blocks were clean. The fog had burned off, but the sky stayed overcast, which kept the light flat and the shadows shallow. Fewer places for surprises. I began to let myself believe we might make it without contact. Block 3 disabused me of that. We came around a corner onto Atwater Street and walked into a scene that stopped everyone cold. A city bus articulated, jackknifed across the road. Every window was shattered. Inside, the infected were packed shoulder to shoulder, dozens of them, standing motionless in the dim interior like passengers, waiting for a stop that would never come. They were post-drifter, pre-active, that narrow window, where they're technically dormant, but a loud sound or sudden movement will trigger the whole mass at once. Watts held up a fist. Everyone stopped. I counted windows, estimated bodies, 40, maybe 50, all standing, all facing forward toward the front of the bus, as if something about the vehicle's orientation gave their degraded navigation instincts a default direction. We go around, I whispered. South 1 block. Come back to the waterfront past the bus. That takes us through residential, Watts said. More entry points, less visibility. Better than waking up 50 of them, she agreed. We backtracked, hooked south, and moved through a residential block, row houses with doors hanging open. Yards turned to mud, a dog that watched us from a porch with the resigned intelligence of an animal that had learned to survive by being invisible. One of the children reached toward it, and Suyon gently pulled her hand back. We cleared the residential block and came back to the waterfront, 200 yards west of the bus. The marina was visible now, a cluster of wooden docks extending into the river, maybe 30 boat slips, half of them empty. The boats that remained were a mix of pleasure craft and small fishing vessels. At least 3 looked seaworthy from a distance. Relief is a dangerous thing in a survival situation. It relaxes your attention at exactly the moment you should be sharpening it. I felt it wash through the group as the marina came into view, shoulders dropping, breathing slowing. A child saying boats in a voice bright with the first hope I'd heard from any of them. I didn't feel it. I was running Marcus's plan through the filter of Herrera's information, and something was catching. The armory on Sheen Street. Marcus had described it as if he'd verified its contents, but the same man who knew the barge was gone could also know the armory was empty. What if the armory run wasn't about weapons? What if it was about Marcus controlling where he'd be when the virus finally took him away from the civilians, away from the children, away from me? If that was true, then the 3 people with him were walking into a situation that had nothing to do with resupply and everything to do with one man's plan for his own ending. I keyed the CB Channel 9. Herrera, status, static. 15 seconds, 20. Then, not Herrera's voice, Gareth's. Joel, we have a situation. Gareth's voice on the CB was controlled in the way that deeply frightened people become controlled, each word placed carefully, like stepping on stones across a fast river. Marcus collapsed on the 2nd floor of the armory. Herrera's with him. He's conscious, but he's not. He's not right, Joel. He's talking, but it's like listening to someone do math while they're drowning. He keeps giving orders that don't connect to anything. What kind of orders? He wants Tomlin to go to an address on East Vernor. Residential. He's insisting. He says there's critical supplies there. Tomlin's ready to go, but Herrera told him to hold. My hand tightened on the CB. An address on East Vernor. Not an armory, not a supply cache, a residential address. Gareth, what's the address? He read it to me. 1847 East Vernor, Unit 3. I knew that address. I knew it because Marcus had mentioned it once, months ago, in a conversation I'd barely registered at the time. He'd been talking about his ex-girlfriend Danielle and their daughter. A daughter I'd never met, a daughter Marcus rarely discussed. A 4-year-old named Iris who lived with her mother in a second-floor apartment on East Vernor. The ground shifted under me. Not physically, I was standing on solid concrete at the marina dock, but structurally, the architecture of every order Marcus had given since we left the checkpoint rearranging itself into a new and terrible pattern. Why did he route us east instead of west? Because East Vernor is east. Why did he refuse to go right on Rivard when the path was clear? Because right would have taken us south, away from the Vernor corridor. Why did he split the group? Not to reach an armory, to reach an apartment, to reach a 4-year-old girl. Every order, every tactical decision, every lie dressed up as leadership. It all pointed to 1847 East Vernor, Unit 3. I stood on the dock with the CB in my hand and the river behind me, and I felt the full weight of it settle into my chest like concrete. Marcus hadn't been leading us. He'd been steering us, using the group's survival as cover for a private mission he couldn't execute alone. Because alone he was a bitten man with a ticking clock, but with a squad following his orders, he was still a force that could cut through a city of infected to reach one apartment, one door, one child. And the hell of it, the absolute irreducible hell of it, was that I understood. If I had a daughter out there, if I was bitten and burning down, and the only asset I had was the loyalty of a man who'd follow me through anything, I might have done the same thing. I would have hated myself for it, but I might have done it. Gareth, is the address residential? Looks like it. Second-floor apartment. Marcus says there's a person there we need to extract. There is, his daughter. Silence on the CB. A long silence in which I could hear Gareth recalculating everything just as I had. He's been bitten, hasn't he? Gareth said. It wasn't a question. Since before we left the checkpoint. Another silence, then Gareth's voice came back harder, stripped of the careful stone stepping, raw and direct. What do you want me to do? And there it was, the question that I'd been avoiding for my entire adult life. The question that Marcus's competence and charisma had always absorbed before it could reach me. What do you want to do? Hold position. Keep Marcus contained. Do not let Tomlin go to that address alone. I'm coming to you. You're at the marina. The group. Watts has the marina. She can start prepping boats. I'll take Reyes and come to the armory. Joel, he's getting worse. The window might not. I know. We move fast. I switched channels and briefed Watts. I told her everything, the bite, the deception, the daughter. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Go. I'll have 2 boats ready by the time you're back. Don't take longer than 3 hours. If I'm not back in 3 hours, I'll load the civilians and cross. I know." She paused. "Joel, you're making the right call." I didn't know if she was right. I still don't. But I took Reyes and went north. We ran. Not tactically, not carefully, we ran through the streets of a dead city with our rifles bouncing against our chests and our boots echoing off buildings. We ran past infected who turned at the sound, but couldn't close the distance. We ran past cars and barricades, and a fire that was still burning in a storefront, with no one to put it out and no one to care. We ran because the clock in my head was counting down 2 timelines, Marcus's turn, and the 3 hours Watts had given me, and both were shrinking faster than the distance. The armory was a squat National Guard facility, the kind that in peacetime hosted weekend drills and storage. Gareth met us at the door. His face was gray. "Upstairs. Herrera's got him restrained." The word restrained hit different when it was about the man who'd been the center of your decision-making for years. I went upstairs. Marcus was on the floor of a supply room, his back against the wall, his wrists zip-tied in front of him. Herrera was kneeling beside him, monitoring his pulse with 2 fingers on his neck. Tomlin and Obasi were standing at the door with expressions that fell somewhere between grief and readiness. Marcus looked up when I entered. His eyes were still sharp, but the sharpness had a different quality now, not the focused clarity of command, but the narrow, predatory attention of a system being rewired. His skin was slick with sweat. The veins on his neck were visible, dark, standing out like wiring under thin fabric. "Joel!" His voice was raw, slower than normal, but still his. "Did Gareth tell you about Vernor?" "He told me. I figured out the rest." "Then you know. I know you used all of us to get to your daughter. I know every order you gave was designed to move us toward her. I know you chose a route that got people hurt to stay on your heading. I know you lied about the barge, lied about the armory, lied about everything except the direction. I didn't lie about keeping you alive. You put 3 soldiers in this building under false pretenses. If you'd turned an hour ago, but I didn't. I held it. I'm holding it now." His hands were trembling against the zip ties, a fine vibration that he couldn't suppress. "Iris is 6 blocks from here, Joel. 6 blocks. Danielle stopped answering her phone on day 3 of the outbreak. I don't know if she's alive. I don't know if Iris is alive. But I couldn't walk away without trying. You could have told me. And you would have said it was too dangerous. You would have prioritized the group. That's my job. That's exactly why I couldn't tell you. Because you would have been right, and I couldn't afford for you to be right. Not about this." He coughed, something wet and dark. Herrera's hand moved to his shoulder, steadying him. "How long?" I asked her. "An hour. Maybe 2. The tremor's accelerating." I knelt down in front of Marcus, my best friend, the man who'd taught me how to lead by never letting me practice, the man who'd used my loyalty as a tool and my love as a lever, and who, even now, was looking at me with the desperate, focused need of a father running out of time. "Tell me about the apartment," I said. "Everything. Layout, entry points, which window is Iris's room. Tell me everything and I'll go get her." The sound he made wasn't quite a sob. It was closer to a structural failure, something inside him letting go, a beam he'd been holding through sheer will finally cracking. He told me. 2nd floor, exterior stairs on the east side. Iris's room was the back bedroom with a window facing the alley. Danielle kept a go-bag in the hall closet. There was a fire escape. "If Danielle's there and if she's turned, I'll get Iris out, whatever it takes." "Joel." His hand found my forearm, the grip weaker than it should have been. "I'm sorry. For the orders? For using you? For all of it." I covered his hand with mine for a moment. Then I stood up. "Herrera, when the time comes, don't let him suffer." She nodded. Her eyes were wet, but her hands were steady. I took Reyes and Obasi and I left the armory. Behind me I heard Marcus say something, but the words were slurred and I couldn't make them out. I've spent a long time trying to reconstruct that sentence from memory. I never have. It's just gone his last words to me, absorbed by concrete walls and distance. Irretrievable. East Vernor was 6 blocks of residential decay. Row houses, apartment buildings, a corner store with its gate torn off. The infected density was higher here. We passed clusters of 8, 10, moving through the street with that purposeless drift that could snap into pursuit at any moment. Reyes handled the navigation while Obasi covered our movement, and I focused on the addresses counting down toward 1847. The building was a 2-story brick walk-up, 3 units, external stairs on the east side as Marcus described. The ground floor door was closed but not locked. The stairwell was dark and smelled of old food and something chemical bleach maybe. Someone had tried to sanitize the common areas at some point. I went up alone. Reyes and Obasi held the ground floor. The hallway was narrow, 1 window at the far end letting in gray light, 2 doors on each side. Unit 3 was the last on the left. The door was closed, locked. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. "Danielle? My name is Joel. I'm a friend of Marcus. I'm here for Iris." Silence, then from behind the door a sound so small I almost missed it. A child's voice, thin and reedy, saying a word I couldn't make out. Then another voice, an adult woman's, weak but coherent. How do I know you're real? Marcus sent me. He told me Iris's room is the back bedroom with a window facing the alley. He told me you keep a go bag in the hall closet. The lock turned. The door opened 3 inches, held by a chain. A woman's face appeared in the gap, mid-30s, exhausted, a bruise on her cheekbone, eyes scanning me with the rapid assessment of someone who'd been surviving alone for 10 days. Where is he? He couldn't come himself. He sent me to bring you out, both of you. We have boats at the marina. We're crossing to the island. Where is Marcus? I could have lied. Marcus would have lied. Marcus would have said whatever was necessary to get this door open and this woman and this child moving. But I was not Marcus, and I was learning, violently and in real time, what it cost to build leadership on deception. He's bitten, Danielle. He's been bitten since before we moved out. He used every order he had left to get me here. Her face crumpled. Not collapsed, crumpled, like paper being slowly crushed. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, the grief was still there, but it was behind glass, contained, functional. Iris, baby, get your backpack. The door closed. The chain slid. The door opened fully. Danielle was thin, wearing clothes she'd clearly been in for days. Behind her, in the dim apartment, a small girl with Marcus's wide-set eyes and a purple backpack was standing in the hallway, looking at me with the solemn gravity of a child who had learned too much too fast. Are you my dad's friend? Iris asked. Yeah, I said. I am. Is he coming? I knelt down so I was at her eye level. I thought about what Marcus would say. I thought about what I should say. And for the first time, I chose my own words without checking them against anyone else's template. He did everything he could to get me here. That's how much he loves you. Now I'm going to take you somewhere safe, okay? She considered this with the seriousness of a person assessing a contract. Then she nodded. We moved. Danielle had the go bag. Iris had her backpack. Reyes took point and Obasi took rear, and I walked in the center with a 4-year-old's hand in mine. And every step I took was a step I chose. On a route I determined, toward a destination I believed in, for reasons that were entirely my own. The return route was longer. I chose it deliberately: wider streets, more visibility, longer sightlines. Not Marcus's method of threading needles through narrow gaps. My method. Slower but safer, with a child, a civilian woman, in a group that couldn't run if things went wrong. The infected were thicker along the waterfront approach. Whatever dormancy the fog had induced that morning was gone. They were active, moving in loose packs, and we had to stop twice and hold in doorways while groups passed. Iris was silent during these stops, her hand tight in mine, her breathing controlled with a discipline that broke my heart. No child should know how to be that quiet. We were 2 blocks from the marina when the CB crackled. Gareth's voice stripped down to its essential components. Joel, Marcus turned 20 minutes ago. Herrera handled it. We're mobile, heading to the marina. I looked at Danielle. She was walking behind Reyes, her face fixed forward, and I knew she'd heard it. She didn't stop. She didn't react. She kept walking. I've thought about that moment 100 times. The discipline it took to keep moving when the person you'd shared a child with had just ceased to exist. And I've never been able to decide if it was strength or shock or some fusion of the two that doesn't have a name. Iris tugged my hand. What did the radio say? Our friends are coming to meet us, I said. It was true. It was incomplete. I was learning that there's a space between deception and full truth where you can operate without betraying either. The marina appeared through a gap between buildings. Watts was on the dock, waving us in. Behind her, 2 boats were running. I could hear the engines from a block away, a sound so startlingly normal, so connected to a world that still functioned, that it almost knocked the breath out of me. A fishing boat and a cabin cruiser, both idling, both loaded with civilians. Priya was on the fishing boat, helping the children aboard. Arthur was already in the cruiser, his wheelchair lashed to the deck. We reached the dock and I handed Iris to Danielle, who lifted her onto the fishing boat without a word. Then I turned and waited. Gareth arrived 12 minutes later with Tomlin and Obasi and Herrera. 4 people, not 5. The space where Marcus should have been was a physical thing. I could see it in the way they moved. A formation with a hole in it, each of them subtly angled away from the gap, as if proximity to his absence was painful. Herrera met my eyes, shook her head once, not in negation, but in closure. The clinical precision that had defined her was still there, but underneath it, something was bruised. Clean? I asked. Clean. Fast. He asked me to tell you something. What? He said, tell Joel the last 5 were for her. He said you'd understand. I did understand. The last 5 orders he'd given. The route east instead of west, the left turn on Rivard, the checkpoint departure, the group split, the Vernor address. 5 orders, every one of them warped by his private mission, every one of them designed to bend the trajectory of 9 soldiers and 15 civilians toward one apartment on one street where one 4-year-old girl was waiting. He'd used us, he'd used me, and he'd saved his daughter's life. Load up, I said. We cross now. Nobody questioned it, not because I had Marcus's voice or Marcus's gravity, because I'd made a decision and they could see it was mine. There's a difference between following someone who projects certainty and following someone who's visibly choosing despite uncertainty. The first is easier. The second is more trustworthy. I was learning that in the most expensive classroom imaginable. We loaded the boats, 24 people across 2 vessels, overloaded but functional. Watts piloted the cruiser. Reyes took the fishing boat. I stood at the stern of the fishing boat and watched the Detroit waterfront recede, the customs office, the dock, the city of buildings, and infected in fire and silence, and I let it all get small behind us. Iris was sitting on a bench in the fishing boat's cabin, her purple backpack on her lap, watching me through the window. She had her father's eyes, not just the color or the shape, but something behind them, that quality of looking at you and seeing not what you were, but what you could be useful for. In Marcus, it had been a tool of command. In a 4-year-old, it was just attention, pure, undamaged attention, waiting to see what the world would do next. I held her gaze until the boat turned and the angle broke, and then I watched the water. Belle Isle was not what anyone hoped for, but it was what we had. The island's park infrastructure, pavilions, restrooms, a conservatory with broken glass gave us shelter. The bridges to the mainland had been barricaded early in the outbreak by someone with the same island logic we'd had, and while the barricades were crude, they'd held. The infected can't swim. Not effectively. They walk into the water and the current takes them downstream. We watched it happen from the shore on our first night, 3 of them, wading in from the mainland bank, each one swept away within seconds, carried by the dark river toward Lake Erie and whatever waited there. We set up in the old yacht club building. Solid walls, multiple rooms, a dock for the boats. I organized the watch rotation, assigned sleeping areas, distributed the remaining supplies. Every decision was mine. Not because I wanted it, but because no one else was positioned to make them, and the vacuum of command is a thing that fills one way or another. Either someone steps in, or chaos does. Priya kept writing in her notebook. She'd added new names to the school group: Danielle, Iris, Arthur, every person who'd passed through the orbit of our survival. I asked her once why she did it. She said, because someone should remember that they existed, even if no one reads this. I thought about Marcus, about whether anyone would remember him accurately, not the legend of the commander who held his unit together, but the full truth of the man who lied and manipulated and loved his daughter enough to turn his own decay into a navigation instrument, pointing everyone he could toward one address on East Vernor. I thought about the orders I'd executed. Every one of them had been compromised. Every one of them had also worked. People were alive because Marcus bent the truth into a shape that kept us moving when honest uncertainty would have frozen us in place. And I thought about what happens now. Not to the world would do what it did, and we'd respond or we wouldn't. But to me, to the version of Joel Allard who no longer had Marcus Bowen's voice in his ear, telling him where to go and what to do and making it sound like the only possible choice. That Joel was gone. The one standing on Belle Isle, watching the water and waiting for morning, was someone newer. Not better, not wiser. Just more aware of the weight of a decision when it's yours alone to carry. Danielle found me on the dock that first night. She stood beside me for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "He talked about you. More than anyone. He said you were the best soldier he'd ever served with and the worst leader he'd ever met." I almost laughed. He wasn't wrong. He also said you'd figure it out when you had to. Did he figure it out? At the end? She looked at the water. Marcus always knew what he was doing. That was the problem. He knew too much and trusted too little. He couldn't let anyone else carry the weight because he didn't believe they could hold it. He was right about me. I couldn't hold it. Not then. What about now? I looked back at the yacht club. Through the windows I could see Herrera checking on Arthur, Watts reviewing a map with Gareth, Priya reading to the children from a book she'd found somewhere in the building, Reyes cleaning his rifle, Tomlin and Obasi sleeping, finally the deep sleep of people who'd been running on adrenaline for days. 23 people, minus one, alive on an island, in a river, in a dead city, in a world I couldn't predict or control. I don't know, I told her, but I'm going to find out. I still hear his voice. Not in a haunted way, in an operational way. When a decision needs to be made and the pressure is acute, my brain produces a sound like Marcus's voice saying what he would say, and I have to consciously override it. Sometimes I listen. Sometimes the ghost is right. But the act of choosing whether to follow it or not, that's the thing Marcus never gave me while he was alive. The choice itself, the weight of it. We've been on the island for 11 days now. 3 more groups have crossed by boat. We have 41 people. I lead them not because I'm the most capable, but because I was the one who stepped forward when the gap opened and no one else moved. That's not heroism. That's just timing. Iris asked me yesterday if her father was a good person. She asked it plainly, the way children ask things, without rhetorical armor or preloaded answers. I told her that her father was the most complicated person I'd ever known, and that he loved her more than he loved being right, and that in the end, being right was the thing he loved most in the world, so that meant something. She thought about it and said, "Okay." Then she went back to drawing on the floor of the yacht club with crayons Priya had found in the desk. I carry his last 5 orders like stones in my pockets. I can't put them down because they worked. I can't hold them up because they were lies. I just carry them. Every morning I stand on the dock and look at the mainland. The city is still burning in places. The infected are still moving. Dark shapes against dark streets, an ecosystem of ruin that doesn't need us and doesn't miss us. And every morning I make a decision what to do, where to go, who to protect. And the decision is mine, fully mine, for better or for worse. It's the heaviest thing I've ever held. It's the first thing that's ever been entirely my own.